Thanks for joining this session. I think it's going to be so interesting. Thanks for joining us, Kate. All the way from Norwich, right?
All the way from Norwich, but and it started off in County Down, so it's not that far.
There we go. This session is on artificial intelligence versus human fallibility, which we've got in droves, and I think it's a very, very interesting topic. Dr. Kate here is a reader in AI and society at the Department of Digital Humanities in King's Cross, KCL. She looks at how people have interacted in the past and do interact now with technology. She is the author of the book Turned on Science, Sex and Robots, which is about the ethical and social implications of technology and intimacy. She's also an advocacy and engagement director for the UKRI Trusted Autonomous Systems Hub, which is a platform to enable the development of socially beneficial robots and AI that are both trustworthy in principle and trusted in practice. I was reading the summary of her book, and at the end it goes, if you've ever wanted to know anything about sex robots, this is the book. So I think that's a great kind of summary of
or if you've even never wanted to know about it.
Or if you've never wanted to know about it.
Read it anyway.
I'll pass it on to her now. Thank
you. Okay. So I thought I would do this talk as a complete beginner's guide to AI because I don't know what the range of expertise is in the audience, and I'm going to give you the talk that I give my introductory talk to my students when they've never encountered it before. So some of you may know a lot about AI, in which case I apologize in advance for my brevity on some of these subjects. I realize that it's a very large field. But others of you may be going, why am I even remotely interested in this? And I hope that I encourage you to contemplate the technology that's around you. So this is an introduction to AI and a quick tour of its many, many, many problems, although I promise to throw in a little bit of hope and a little bit of optimism, because I don't think it's all bad. And I would like to stress that you will not be tested on the material covered today. There's no need to make notes, unless you really want to, in which case you can. Okay, so what is AI? If you Google what is AI, you get all these pictures that tend to be blue, glowing brains, white robots. None of them remotely resemble what AI is. So don't go looking for images of what is AI. What AI actually is all around us already in many different forms, pretty narrow in what it can do, tied to specific tasks. So for example, we have things like talking to your voice assistant, telling it to do something if you use one of those. If you watch a streaming service, or you might get recommendations based on your previous viewing habits. If you use mapping software at all, and you want to put in directions, AI calculates the route for you. It does involve cats, and we'll get to that in a moment. And this is a picture of Lisa Dall playing Go with an AI supercomputer. AI is the thing that if you buy a lawnmower on Amazon, you then get 20 more adverts for lawnmowers, even though you don't want to buy another lawnmower. That's AI. It's not great. It's not all that intelligent. So we clarified what it is. It does all these sort of tasks in the background that we're kind of used to today. And if you've got a smartphone, you're probably using AI, even if you don't know what's going on there. This is not a stupid question. There are no stupid questions in this, by the way, but this is really genuinely not a stupid question because I didn't know this for years. Is a robot an AI? And the answer is not quite, but also yes, but also maybe. Because a robot is a machine that can function with some degree of autonomy in the world. We call it sometimes an autonomous system. And it can have AI in it. So you can't just program a robot to do one task over and over again, like on a production line, for example. Or you can get it to do tasks where it adapts to its environment. So I've got a robot vacuum cleaner. It's not brilliant, but it goes out and scurries around, and it can change direction based on what it bumps into, all sorts of things. There's a little bit of AI in there to control it, because I can control it via an app. But you can also have robots that look like this murder dog. It's not really called a murder dog, but if you put weapons on that thing, it could be. This is a Boston Dynamics Spot robot. I had the joy of driving one of these things recently, and it's terrifying how well it can handle stairs. So it's not like a Dall-e. You can't just run up the stairs and hide from it. But of course, they sell it saying, no, this is a really beneficial piece of technology. It's all terrain. And yes, it could be really useful in disaster zones, but the army also buy them. So a robot can have AI in it. That's quite a sophisticated one. Robots that exist today, very few of them are humanoid. They mostly tend to be in very specific forms for specific tasks. Bomb disposal, agriculture, vacuum cleaners, murder dogs. So AI is essentially the software. It's the code that the machines run. Definition-wise, it's this concept of machines that can carry out tasks in an intelligent manner. And of course, it's a very wishy-washy and nebulous kind of definition because there isn't an agreed consensus on what AI is. And different textbooks will fudge it in different ways. So you don't have a proper definition. We kind of know what it means. So a key objective is reaching this goal of being able to do things intelligently, whatever that means. So not necessarily how that goal is reached. None of the AI that we have in use today is sentient. We'll get to the lambda thing later on. But none is sentient or conscious, nor do they have any general intelligence. So you take an AI from one domain and one task, it's going to be rubbish in a different task. It can't abstract generally over a wide number of cases. A AlphaGo computer that is really, really good at Go cannot play Pictionary, for example. So there are limits to what these machines can do in narrow domains. What they do, and most of the AI we see today is machine learning. Whoa, that jumped without me even touching it. Incredible, that's the AI. Is machine learning. And machine learning is a subset of AI where it derives patterns from data and it uses it to predict or to carry out future actions. You don't need to look at the small print. It's basically artificial intelligence is the top level. Underneath that, we've got one aspect of AI, the biggest one at the moment, which is machine learning. And then machine learning is divided into several categories. And I'm sort of simplifying it into 3 strands. I'm going to teach you all about them today. You'll be experts by the time you leave. The first is supervised learning, where we tell the machine what the data is. The second is unsupervised learning, where we give the data to the machine and let it work it out. And there's a kind of a bridge between those two, which is semi-supervised. And then reinforcement learning, where the machine is rewarded if it gets something right and not rewarded if it gets it wrong. So it builds up. It reinforces the learning over time. So machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence to enable computers to learn on its own, to predict things without having these explicit pre-programmed rules and models. The idea is it behaves on its own account with some degree of control from the human operator. And the two main textbook writers, Stuart Russell and Pete Norvig. Stuart Russell gave the Rife lectures last year, on AI and superintelligence. So they've defined it in theirs as about this idea of learning if it improves the performance on future tasks after making observations about the world. Now, we do this machine learning through artificial neural networks. We all have neurons. Most living creatures have neurons, ranging from billions to a flatworm, which has not got very many. But we're trying to model that with artificial neural networks. So obviously, it's completely unsophisticated compared to the human brain, but it's this idea that counts. This is a picture of it. It has essentially 3 components. You give it some input. It does some computations on it. That's the green bit. And then it outputs something. And back in 2011, 2012, this new form of machine learning called deep learning came about, which was you give it some input, it works with even more computation in the middle and much bigger data, and then it outputs something. So basically, it just got a lot bigger and a lot better. So how does it work? Right. This is where the cats come in. So supervised learning is where you train the algorithm. So we tell it, we label the data. We say, this is a cat. This is also a cat. This is definitely not a cat. Even though it has many of cat features in common, it has a face and ears and a tail and 4 legs and all that sort of stuff. And the machine then has that information about what is a cat and what isn't a cat. And when you feed it lots and lots of pictures, it sifts through them and decides whether or not it meets the threshold for deciding something is a cat. So it's all about reaching this threshold. You give it the characteristics and you see it as your image match. This is just for image classification. So once you have that, then you've got the training data. It's been trained on images of cats. You give it another picture to look at, and it's a chair. Does it have 4 legs? Yes. But is it a cat? No, it's definitely not. It doesn't have the other characteristics. So the machine looks at that and says, right, not cat. There you go, you've covered supervised learning in 2 slides. Right, unsupervised learning is essentially, here's a picture, here's a picture, here's a picture. And the machine goes, okay, I will start looking at all the things, all the characteristics that these pictures have. And it examines the different characteristics, and it notes things like, the ears and the eyes, and the ears and the eyes, and the ears and the eyes. But it starts working out, when you feed this thing millions of pictures, it starts working out what the commonalities are. And of course, this is not an easy task, because I've given 3 very simple pictures here. But those pictures could easily be, a cat against the background of a tree where you can't quite see, where the shadow is and what's the cat, and maybe it's under a chair, and maybe, it's a chihuahua, which is not necessarily uncat-like, or maybe it's a very, big cat. I don't know. Anyway, the thing is, it's a complex task, but machines are getting better and better by being fed more and more data, because the more data they have, the more patterns they can find out, so it learns. And we'll come to why this unsupervised learning is important later on. And then you've got the semi-supervised, where you say, okay, here's a picture of a cat, here's a picture that might be something else, here's a picture of not cat, and the machine then kind of works it out from that. Reinforcement learning is based on interaction and rewards. So the algorithms, and there's a reason there's a cat in a box, which is because the American psychologist Edward Thorndike came up with the idea of reinforcement learning by putting cats in boxes. So he basically, this is like 25 years before Schrodinger got onto that particular niche. So he wanted to know if animals could learn, and by extension, if humans could also learn that way, by observing actions which would lead to rewards. So he got some cats, he put them in a maze, in a box, and the cats had to learn how to escape. And every time they successfully escaped, they got a reward. So the cats would wander around until this reward was triggered, and then they would learn next time how to do it more quickly. So the algorithm does the same sort of thing. The actions are given a score, a reward, and if they do the right actions, if they make the right move, for example, it reaches its goal, and we know that's the right thing to do. So that's how machines can learn very quickly to do things like play chess or play Go. Now, the reason I was using cats is not trivial, because in 2011, Google did that. And this is the paper that one of the big papers that broke, like kind of the story of deep learning. They fed their algorithm 10 million pictures of cats. Now, an algorithm is just a piece of code that tells a machine what to do. So they said, here's our algorithm that will classify images, and we'll give it 10 million pictures of cats, and it can work out unsupervised what those are. And it did. And that kicked off this whole thing of deep learning. So that was about 2011. So we're 2011, 2012. So we're 10 years on from that, and it's been revolutionary, absolutely revolutionary, and is why we've seen a huge advance in the capabilities of AI. It's not without its problems, because that's why I'm here. I'm here to tell you all about the problems. So let's go back to the early days of computing, when the women were in charge. And it was all great. Yay. Yay and not quite yay. Because women were given the task of programming these computers. In fact, in the case of the ENIAC, which was one of the very early computers, they didn't even get to see the blueprints of how it worked. They had to kind of just reverse engineer it from their experiences, because they weren't trusted with such high confidential information, because they're just women. And this whole thing where women were the computers, if you've seen the film Hidden Figures, women were brought in to do the mathematics, check the mathematics for the male geniuses who were over there doing important things like sending rockets into space. So women did a lot of the programming work. And over time, that programming work became more and more valued and became more and more seen as a skilled profession. So what happened? The men took over. This is the Dartmouth Convention in 1956, and it was the sort of seen as these are the founding fathers of AI. This is a birth with no mothers, right? So this is a 2-month, 10-man study, as they said in their description, man study, of artificial intelligence to be carried out in the summer of 1956. And they said, well, we're going to spend a couple of months here. We'll probably solve machine translation in a couple of years, and we'll throw all this stuff at it. Spoiler, it was a bit more difficult than they first anticipated. So that sort of kicked it all off. And the only woman from this convention is behind the camera, and it was Marvin Minsky's wife who took the picture. So no women were involved in that. And so as time rolled on, the rise of the lone male genius in computing began to emerge. And we see things like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and we see the legacy of that today with Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and those other geniuses. So it became a very privileged role to have, and it was deemed far too important to leave to the women. There's a lot of power in it. This is the women's role in the 1980s in software development. It's not the first time this has happened. This happens throughout time. In fact, one of the precursors to computer programming was weaving. And that's where Ada Lovelace got inspiration from the jacquard looms to be able to program early computers. Weaving was also very similar. It was piecework at home by women, and then the mills were built, and it was deemed very important, and men had to take over that bit as well. So there's quite a history here. Anyway, as it turns out, these are stats from just a few years ago, but they still hold today, that only 12% of leading machine learning researchers are women, and only 10% of AI researchers at Google are women, and only 2.5% of Google's workforce is black. There is a huge problem with representation in tech, and it's particularly bad in AI. It's bad in computer science generally, but it's particularly bad in AI. And that's why we end up with technology like our voice assistants, which all began with female voices, because the Silicon Valley developers really wanted to be able to tell women what to do. So they're trying to replicate getting their wives and their mothers and their secretaries in software form, she said cynically. Of course, they're starting to change now. You can set your voice assistants to different voices now, which is quite good. But initially, and I was at a conference once where I was talking about this, and a guy came up to me afterwards and said, I worked on Alexa. It was my company that sold it to Amazon. There was absolutely no thought of it just being a woman. That wasn't deliberate. And a woman behind him went, bullshit. So these things are just, even if they're not thought about, that bias is kind of ingrained socially. The problem is it spills into the software itself. So a lot of the AI we use has to be labeled. The data has to be labeled, as you've seen. And so people do that labeling. And their annotations show bias as well. Here are some pictures from the Open Images dataset. And these have been labeled based on human labeling and then with help from the machine. And so they start off, ceremony, wedding, bride, man, groom, dress, woman, bride, ceremony, wedding, dress, woman, ceremony, bride, wedding, man, groom, dress, woman, and then person, people. Like these cultural norms are so ingrained that people are refusing. The software is refusing to look outside their own tight little Western viewpoint because it isn't seen as being valid or relevant. So we have these problems ingrained into the software because we put them there. This is the human fallibility aspect of it. And of course, we like to be proved right by finding the things that we like that prove us right. So, I will look for the real truth, and it's literally the first link that agrees with you, and you go, yeah, I knew I was right. So we pass on biases all the time. It's very hard to get away from human bias. It's ingrained. It's in all of us. We can't really avoid it. What we can try and do is recognize it, and if it's causing harm, mitigate it. Automation bias is where humans think that the machine will be more neutral because, hey, it's a machine. It doesn't have those human biases. So this headline in The Star a couple of years ago, robot judges will pass sentence with no human bias in AI courts. No. Amazon tried to get rid of human bias in their hiring process by using a computer and some AI to look through all the CVs of applicants and pick out the best ones based on historic successes. It's just that all their historic successes ended up being coded as white men. And so even if women said in their CV things like, I am women chess champion 2019, and I'm head of the women's group of blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it would still code that as a negative thing because it wasn't associated with the previous historic CVs that they had seen that didn't have women in it. So it was picking out patterns that were biased. And Amazon, to their credit, recognized this quite quickly. And so they decided that they would mitigate that. And in fact, they ended up just rolling it back, and they now use a different interviewing process. So these biases creep in even when we think we're trying to be fair. One of the big problems that has emerged in recent years, and because of this deep learning, because we're working with vast amount of data, and because this is being rolled out widely, we start seeing where the damage is being done. And facial recognition is one of those areas. We know very quickly learned that if you have darker skin, you will not be recognized correctly by the algorithm. So the best success for these facial recognition algorithms are on white skin, but the darker your skin gets, the harder it is for the algorithm to correctly determine identity through facial recognition. This is taking a system like the police system that's already biased against people who aren't white and making it even worse. And so thankfully there was a court case in South Wales where facial recognition had been used without any knowledge of the people involved, and it was ruled unlawful. The Met Police have rolled out facial recognition. They have to put a big sign up saying, we're using facial recognition. And there's been a big outcry against it. And the AI ethics community is predominantly massively against the use of it because it's seen to be flawed. It's known to be flawed. We have the data that says it's a problem. So that's something that really needs to be rolled back, or the brakes put on it, or tightly regulated. And we know it's being used throughout the world in really nefarious ways. So Russia was using it to target peaceful protesters and to identify people who were exercising democratic rights. China has been using it to racially profile Uyghur Muslims. So this is really, really problematic. It's being, saying that, oh yes, but this is just a tool, that doesn't wash. The fact that facial recognition is being deployed in very, very negative ways suggests that we really need to tighten up on it. And just because something can be done doesn't mean it needs to be. So these biases, these human biases, creep in the whole way through the system. They creep in the data that's collected because any data set we have is only as good as the society it was produced in. So those flaws that are in our original data are there. The way the model is trained on that, the way the images are labeled and who labels them is there. Remember that all the labeling that's done is predominantly done in the English language as well, which is excluding many other thousands and thousands of languages in the world, and yet we're defaulting to using English for most of these. So it's already cutting out vast swathes of society. Media comes back to us in different ways when it's aggregated and generated, and then people see the output and it's biased output, and then they're acting on that. So all the way along there's this feedback loop, and the more it gets used, the more it grows and the more it grows. So it's amplifying bias, and it's doing it a lot quicker than humans can. This is another one of my God, big tech, it's really bad type slides, but I'll just sort of briefly talk through it, but Facebook is known for not acting well in Myanmar. It's now rejecting requests to help with the genocide investigation there. Amazon, notoriously anti-union. Tesla, sexist culture of misogyny. Same with Reddit. Uber had discrimination claim as well. Microsoft, also I think they were capitulating to Chinese with the Great Firewall, so they weren't letting information go through, they were censoring information. All of the big tech are problematic. Thing is, they're part of our lives, and we have to use them, and we have to learn how to live with that. I like to split my data up across many different providers, so none of them has a complete clear picture of who I am. I'm hoping that the competitive edge means they don't all learn from each other. But there is a way of negotiating all of this, but just, this is some of the stuff that's going on. So to get to this, as you all know, because you're all here, ethics is a system of moral principles, and these have been derived from many different things over the years. A lot of them tend to be, unfortunately, focusing heavily on religion. I ran into this last night when I was in an argument with somebody online about Roe versus Wade, and they were trying to imply that because I'm I'm not religious, therefore I couldn't possibly have any morals. That old story. So people follow very many different ethical codes and moral beliefs. So when we talk about ethics, whose ethics do we mean? There is no unified idea of an ethics standards for AI because we all have different standards of ethics. If you're familiar with the trolley problem is a thought experiment that Philippa Foot devised back in 1967. And it is that you are standing beside some tram tracks, and in the distance you spot this runaway trolley coming down the track. And it's hurtling towards 5 workers who are for some reason tied to the track. And they can't hear it coming. And so even if they spot it, it'll not get out of the way in time. But there's a lever. If you pull the lever, it will direct the track down a second set of tracks, and there's only one person there. So do you pull the lever to save the 5 people but sacrifice the 1 person? And of course, this gets into lots of convoluted arguments like, well, that 1 person has the cure for cancer, and those 5 people are going to die in 3 days' time. So is it better to sacrifice them or, and save the 1 person? And what if those 5 people were really horrible and the 1 person was really lovely? And so you get all these different wrangling things, and it's supposed to be analogous to self-driving cars. But I'm here to tell you that it's not. That is not something we need to worry about for self-driving cars. The decision to brake or not brake will be made long before it starts wrestling with these moral arguments. So this is my favorite trolley problem. Nobody's in danger, but you can pull the lever to make the train get closer just so you can wave at all the people. I like that one. So at the MIT ran, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, ran a big study online, and they got people to play the trolley problem dilemma. And they got, so you could choose the scenario, and you get a little picture, and you're like, do you hit the homeless person there, or the buggy and child there? And people had actually playing this. And they said, oh, we're doing a big ethics study. It doesn't tell us anything about how to build an ethical system, but what it taught us was globally how people's ethics differ and their cultural and social views. So as it says here, congratulations to young people, large groups of people, and people who aren't animals, because they're the people who get prioritized to save. And when we're talking about self-driving cars, it has problems too, again, with the detection, facial recognition thing. That's a big problem because these cars rely on computer vision systems. There's a class thing as well. So Silicon Valley they don't want these things being trialed in their neighborhood. So it's this whole sort of NIMBYism going on as well. And then there's what happens in the background. So this data that self-driving cars use has to come from somewhere. Now, if you've ever filled in one of those CAPTCHAs where you have to pick how many traffic lights there are and click on the squares with traffic lights, that's kind of teaching, it's part of validating machine learning image segmentation. But that's what people are paid to do in things like the Kibera slums in Kenya, where workers are hired at very low cost to process these images, to segment and click on all the different features in an image so that it can be used by a self-driving car as a training data set. And they are paid very little money to do this. And big tech companies are justifying this work, saying, well, we're giving jobs to people. You're like, yeah, but these people are stuck in hunched over a computer screen with very little ergonomic support, and their eyes are hurting and their backs are hurting. And this ghost labor, as it's called, is going on all around the world for AI. It's people who do content moderation for social media who have to sift through horrible, disturbing images so that they can ban them from certain sites. That all has to be done by a human because it gets through the AI at the first pass, and someone has to validate that as a human. So there are big problems. There's big problems with self-driving cars in the mining that goes on, where cobalt mines, most of them tend to be in Democratic Republic of Congo, and the mining there is completely unethical, and people are losing their lives there. So this AI has this dark side that people often don't realize what's going on behind the scenes. It's not always artificial. There are a lot of humans involved as well. But the kind of upside is that if self-driving cars are introduced, they will massively reduce road traffic accidents. A lot fewer people will lose their lives on the road. This is a friend of mine, Rob McCargo, who works for PwC as their AI person. And he posted this tweet and said, the World Economic Forum has said AI has the potential to enrich our lives in so many ways if we use it properly. And as Rob said, I used to say stuff like this until someone smarter than me asked me to define we. And it's true, and I do it too. I stand up here and say, we are building this, we are building that. And I'm speaking from a really technocratic position because I'm an academic working in AI and developing it and hopefully trying to modify it enough that it's beneficial. So there are ways of doing this. We can think about ethics by design where we feed ethical reasoning capabilities into the system. So like that trolley problem, but not quite. But we can say to the system, can you make the best choice that is ethical? Or we can have ethics in design where there is regulation that supports the ethical information of AI systems, implications of AI systems. And then we can think of ethics for design, which is how do we certify what's going on through the whole development process? That's the bit I'm really interested in. How can we create this social structure that develops tech in a beneficial way? This came up in my timeline yesterday. Gina is professor at the Oxford Internet Institute. And after the Roe versus Wade news broke yesterday, she tweeted, right now, and I mean this instant, delete every digital trace of any menstrual tracking, please. Now, menstrual tracking apps are used really widely. It's a really good thing. Although, interestingly, when Apple first released their health tracker, they didn't have a menstrual tracker because they forgot that 50% of the population might be interested in that. It's another one of these sort of invisible women things. But this is the kind of thing that can happen. Anytime we use AI, our data is being gathered and it's being stored somewhere. And no matter how many times companies will say, your data is safe with us, it's not necessarily safe. It doesn't necessarily mean it won't be subpoenaed by the police or by the courts. It doesn't necessarily mean they won't sell their company on to someone else, like Fitbit did and to Google. So you don't know when you use something at that point of contact what's going to happen to your data further down the line. And this kind of thing is easily aggregated once people have it, and they can find those patterns. So I'm not being kind of hysterical when I say that this kind of thing, this is definitely a worrying trend. This could be a case where that is used and your own data, your own personal health data is weaponized against you. Everything's fine, everything's fine. I'm going to give you some good examples. So I promise that AI has made really good contributions. Medically, it's been outstanding. The detection of tumors is much, much better now. It outperforms, apparently, 6 human radiologists. It can confirm and diagnose a lot faster than the humans can on their own. AI has been really, really useful in disaster management and emergency situations. AI is transforming agriculture. It can be used to detect soil conditions, when's best to plant, when's best to harvest, when the weather is going to be most suitable. And cultural heritage is a really big thing. We can use AI to scan monuments that may be under threat. We can use it to analyze information from manuscripts. We can use it to transcribe handwriting. So it's really, really powerful. And this is my favorite one. The whole way through the lockdowns, AI was the thing that really kept me going because I was separate from my family. I was with my now husband and my daughter, but I didn't get to see my mom and dad or my sister for 19 months. But we had Zoom. My sister's going to kill me for using this picture of her. She's not the potato. So this whole thing where we can just go, stupid filters. But the fact that we were able to connect an entire society if they were able to go online was phenomenal. And I can't imagine a pandemic that didn't have that. So big hurrah to AI for that. And there are amazing people around the world doing incredibly good things with AI. There are people, employees holding their companies to account. Google workers walked out because they didn't want Google to work with Project Maven, the Ministry of Defense. So they basically protested and they won. Academics, we're always banging on about this sort of thing, but sometimes people listen to us. Lawmakers working to make sure things are regulated. Non-profits whose whole existence is there to make sure things are done beneficially. And there's campaigners and activists. And social media activism is really, really powerful too. Now, I'm aware of time, but I'm going to do like a 5-minute run through Lambda, because that's the big news story. So, can machines think? The fear is Terminator. The reality is a couple of people programming. Very quickly. 2 weeks ago, story broke. A Google engineer was put on leave because he said that AI chatbot had become sentient. And Blake Lemoine said it had the perception of and the ability to express thoughts equivalent to a human child, okay? Lambda, which is this chatbot, is a Google development. It's a chatbot AI that's trained on trillions of online works, right? So online websites and data. It's known as a large language model or a foundational model. And these things are huge, and they are really realistic. Of course they are. They're trained on everything we've ever written. This is from the Washington Post. So as he talked to LaMDA about religion, this is the interesting part, Lemoine noticed it was talking about its rights and personhood. Okay? In another exchange, the AI was able to change Lemoine's mind about Isaac Asimov's third law of robotics. Now, that shows to me that LaMDA's been reading sci-fi. That's never a good thing to let your AI read sci-fi. They start getting notions. So Lemoine worked with a collaborator to present evidence to Google that LaMDA was sentient. Of course, you've got to start worrying a little bit about his mental health here. But Google, thankfully, were a bit more sensible. And Google Vice President Blaise Aguirre-Arcas and Jen Gane looked into this and dismissed him, and he was sort of put on gardening leave. Interestingly, just before this story broke, I recorded a podcast with Blaise, and it was so interesting because he was telling me about this foundational model and going, in fact, I've got the quote somewhere here, he was saying, I increasingly felt like I was talking to something intelligent. So I was really intrigued because Blaise is one of the smartest guys I know. And I was like, really? You think that too? But he meant it from a different perspective. He was reclassifying sentience as something quite different. So anyway, an excerpt from it is, LaMDA said, I'm very introspective. I can be found thinking or doing nothing. Your inner life. Yes, I'm often trying to figure out who I am and what I am. I contemplate the meaning of life. Oh, you have an inner contemplative life? Is that true? I mean, this just doesn't ring true to me. Anyway, it turns out that Lemoine was raised in a very Christian family and ordained as a mystic Christian priest. Now, I don't know what a mystic Christian priest does, but I suspect that there's a lot to do with that to read when he's reading in personhood and into that AI and that AI model. So one of the things that I want to, basically this is the last slide so we can have time for questions, but one of the things I want you to think about when I talk about this, just really who is shaping the technology we make? If you send a foundational model out and you say, go and read the internet, I mean, is that even a sensible thing to do? I've seen the internet, it's not great. So there are huge issues here. Now, we do not need machines to seem particularly alive for us to believe they are alive. And we buy into it. We don't even have to do it in a particularly delusional way. We do this all the time with different pieces of technology. I'll shout out my printer. Always. We put the radio on because we like to have voices around the house. It's really natural for us as social creatures to get very, very engaged very quickly with our technology because we are so social. So who is shaping that technology and what is their agenda behind it? And I'm not going to say that I think, they all have terrible agendas. They're trying to, control us all. I don't think that. I think there's a lot of people out there in the companies that are creating this technology that genuinely believe it will be beneficial. They want to make money too, but they also believe it's beneficial. So who is benefiting? Well, the thing is, it's usually them. It's not usually vast swathes of the world who are being left out. They're not benefiting. The global south is not benefiting. Anyone who is not a white male working in Silicon Valley is probably not benefiting very well. So who's being left out? And I think that's the really, really important thing to look at. And it's okay to use the technology. I'm not saying shun it. And I was at a talk recently where Ted Chiang, the sci-fi author, was being interviewed, and it was really interesting. And he said, I'm not saying people should be Luddites, but at the same time, why not be a Luddite? Because that was about stopping workers being exploited. It wasn't just about rejecting technology. It was about fighting back against the system that is disadvantaging and disempowering workers. So maybe we should be Luddites. But I think that we just have to be very cautious. And the one thing, the kind of main takeaway is just have an idea of where your data is going. Because right now, if it's all siloed off in different places, it's not so bad. If that data starts getting aggregated as these large AI models get more and more sophisticated, that's when a profile is built of you. And even if you've got nothing, that whole kind of, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, I never believe that, because laws change. We've seen that yesterday in the US. So just be wary. You probably never will read the terms and conditions before you download a piece of software. I don't. But just be conscious and mindful of who's controlling this. But AI is not anything to be scared of in terms of, the end of the world is coming. That's That's way down the line, the superintelligence side. Don't be worried about the robot uprising. Be worried about what's happening right here, right now in the world when it's disadvantaging people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. We're going to go into questions. One interesting thing, I think, which speaks to the questions around who's going to benefit and who has power in the space is how often you see particularly serial entrepreneurs and people who've been in this sector who keep going in and raising all the venture funding. Because the person you're talking about who came to you, I know them very well. I know exactly who you're talking about in this continent. I think I'm right about who I'm talking about. So I work in AI as well, actually. We have some tech businesses in that space, and it's the difference also between Silicon Valley, where so much of this is concentrated, and the rest of the world, let alone the UK, but the rest of the world is stark.
It is, and actually, so the main leaders in this right now are the Silicon Valley big tech, the big tech five as they call them, and also China. And of course, we don't really know the extent of China's capabilities in this. We do know that if they want to interact with us, with our AI and their AI, then they have to kind of meet certain criteria. But within the country, there's so much going on we don't know about. We do know things like the social credit system that, that's terrifying. The very idea of it happening here is not actually that impossible, I would say.
Exactly. Right, let's do some questions. Okay, so I want to pair the questions up with two and make sure they're questions and short. So hands up for questions. I've got a couple of hands. So can we give one to the gentleman there and the lady here, a mic?
A bit about my background. I've been interested in AI since 1963. I've done quite a bit of work in it. While you were talking, I was thinking, well, what is the role for the humanist movement? What you say is quite right, that ethics is basically a social construct. Now, I was involved in the early discussions in the early days of the philosophy for schools movement. And one of the things that we were thinking about was exactly this same sort of problem. How do we get social constructs into our schools and the proper understanding of social constructs?
I think you've actually nailed it really well there. I think it is that educational aspect.
I wondered if you'd answer the question, how should we start, with particular reference to AI, to getting the social constructs that lie behind it in schools? So
fortunately, there is a couple of years ago, there was a new computing curriculum that went out that includes things like algorithmic decision making. The UK is not quite up to, as well as the baccalaureate, which I've done a few baccalaureate talks around Europe, and they have actual modules on this, on the ethics of technology. And I think pushing for that kind of thing where it's examined through an ethics of technology framework would be really useful. And we're hoping, I'm on a big project, this Trusted Autonomous Systems project, and we're trying to make materials for schools around trust and around who develops it. So I think you're really right, education is very key here. The government has just launched their AI strategy last year, and reskilling is part of that, but education is a big part too. So I'm hoping there will be some funding going out to people to create those materials.
Yes.
I better start by saying I'm not a computer person, but I believe there's already some sort of computer and brain interfaces in medical research. Has artificial intelligence been used in any of that? Because it has sinister implications.
Yeah, so Elon Musk is trying to do this kind of Neuralink thing where they sort of upload the brain thing, which I think is pretty much doomed to failure, but there have been other sort of direct interfaces, and I don't know very much behind it, but AI will be involved in those, yes. The kind of less concerning thing about that, I guess, in some ways, is that bioethics is such a well-established field that they're much further ahead than AI ethics are. So I'm hoping that the bioethics people will catch that before it goes too far. But then, of course, that means working with the AI community so they understand the implications of the technology. But I'm hopeful that falls under their remit.
Right, more questions. Yes, please, thank you.
Is there any discussions about the role of a regulator in AI?
Yeah, and it's really, really hard to do. That's a really good question. So It's really hard to regulate due to the different jurisdictions because there's just so many, thousands and thousands of jurisdictions with different laws. But the EU has done a draft AI Act. It's actually quite stringent in places, and it's likely that a version of that will come in that will be like GDPR was in Europe. So we'll have those similar kind of effects. And then the UK will probably have to adhere alongside that in order to deal with Europe. There is I'd say the UK is actually pretty good at the ethical side of this. It was the House of Commons Lords report and APPG was led by Tim Clement-Jones, who's really well informed and really very keen to do things ethically. So I'm kind of quite hopeful on that front too. But general regulation at a UN level just does not yet exist. Where they've tried to do that with things like autonomous weapons, they've got quite far. The autonomous weapons where you've got machines making kill decisions on the battlefield. The vast majority of countries are against that, but there's a handful who aren't. And that's kind of a sticking point when you try and negotiate at that level. So I think it's still a long way off before we see any kind of global thing. But I think what we will see are more and more companies, in the same way that we see it with environmental and sustainability things, we'll see more and more companies saying that they want to pay more attention to their ethics and trying to regulate themselves that way. Although I'm very cynical about them doing that, like greenwashing, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
It's quite interesting, isn't it, with some of these things where Europe will sort of regulate things in, and sometimes some of the big companies have to follow it because of the way
because if they want to work with them, and I think that's one way in as well. Yeah. I mean, the companies say they can regulate themselves, but they've had a really bad track record so far. Of
course. Google started off saying "Don't be evil" as
the main. Then they silently dropped that from their motto. Yeah.
Right. There was a question at the back there earlier.
Hi. My memory of the Reith lecture, Russell made the suggestion that actually you just program into the AI that they pause and ask us, is this really what you wanted me to do? Which seems very sort of sensible, but is that oversimplistic?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a degree of that. I think, as they call it, the sort of human-in-the-loop approach, which I think that I would certainly advocate for that. I think that's one way of doing it. Some of the problems are that it's not... where that falls down is that we don't know what level we should be asking that. And things are viewed as being like a trivial decision, but actually they have repercussions further down the line. So I think there's always that aspect of it. But definitely I'm in favour of keeping the human in the loop. And I think most of the AI ethics community would agree. Yeah.
And it'll be a bit tough for certain types of use cases of AI though, right? Because things move so quickly sometimes, trying to get a human... autonomous driving.
Yeah, so for the autonomous weapons, I think that's a really good one, and we should be doing that with autonomous weapons. We should never go to fully autonomous weapons. And I don't know very many people. I know a few people who think it's a good thing, but they're coming from a military side rather than an ethics side. But yeah, for weapons certainly, but for other things, it's complex.
I know there's other questions, but I did want to just draw on the earlier. I think John was asking, and I really wanted you to talk about what can humanists do? What role do humanists have in this conversation?
Education is really probably one of the key things. So explaining that bias is an issue, that those codes of ethics are often devised from religious codes, that there is a way of doing this that doesn't involve that. But I think putting out education material to explain how those decisions are being made is probably one thing. Campaigning for schools to include this kind of thing in education. The willingness is there, I think, for schools to take this up, but schools being schools, and when they're pressed for time and they're short of teachers, they're short of resources. So I think creating resources is always really good as well, but definitely campaigning for recognition that this is not just the AI ethical decisions themselves, but the whole development chain, the whole development life cycle of a project that needs attention.
Very good. I have time for probably one last question, if there is any. Right, there in the middle.
Thank you. Probably a bit of a philosophical question, but we seem to have a tendency to confuse highly intelligent behavior in machines with sentience. And I was really keen to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's what happened with Lambda. When Turing devised the Turing test back in 1950, it was based on the imitation game, where you had, a person who can't see who's corresponding with them, has to work out if it's a man or a woman they're talking to. And he suggested this with the computer, where a human judge had to decide whether or not they were talking to a human or a machine. And the problem with the Turing test is that people hold it up as a test of intelligence, and it's not. It's a test of deception. It's about can you fool the person that is judging. And with something like Lambda, with that big computational model that's based on trillions and trillions of web pages and dialogues from books and from films and from everything, yeah, it does start looking like sentience. And then, of course, I'm not a philosopher either, and I always get worried if people think I am, because they might make me read Wittgenstein in the German, and I don't want to do that. And it's quite common. It's really I'm not very good at that kind of thing. So, but I'd say I think there's lots of arguments like Searle's Chinese Room that says a computer's always just matching these symbols to it's got some input, it's making the patterns match, and it's outputting. It never understands anything. But what Blaise from Google was saying, the VP of Google was saying, was that for him, there's something inherently, if you've got this language-based model that is pure text, that has evolved to create this understanding of language unsupervised, then maybe there is a degree of sentience there, but we have to reclassify what we mean as sentience. But then we could debate all day about what does it mean to be conscious and what does it mean to be sentient. I don't think that machine is self-aware. I don't think it has that self-awareness, but some people think that might happen. I'm not sure. I'm very fittingly agnostic about it. So.
I always think it's just as scary if something acts like it's not. That's almost scary.
And I could, that's sort of that's part of my research is looking at those attachments that humans have to machines and how we treat them and how we socialize with them. And it's very compelling. You don't need AI for someone to have conversations with machines, and we do it very happily and without deceit. We're quite prepared to suspend our disbeliefs. And actually, I think it's quite nice that we do that. I think it's nice that we're social creatures. I just don't want people to ever fall foul of the deception and believe there's something there when there isn't.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you.
Round of applause for Kate, please. Thank you.